Good morning, Dmitri. How are you feeling this morning?
I slept well.
How's the pain?
It's getting less every day. Thank you for everything. I will tell my children my doctor was a hero.
I'm no hero. I'm just being a doctor.
Being modest. They say you served during the worst part of the war.
Young men like you were the heroes, sacrificing your lives. I was just being a doctor. Get some rest. Let me see. Okay.
Good morning, Doctor.
Sophia, you're in good spirits today.
Well, I am being released. My daughter will be here soon.
Be careful with what you eat, or you're going to end up in the hospital again without seeing your grandchildren.
I can't wait to tell them that I am being treated by our leader, who is fighting for us to have a Christian country of our own.
Shh. Quiet down. Sophia, the Bolsheviks, they're not yet ready to give us what we want. So you cannot be talking about being a Christian so freely.
But you are going to succeed.
Maybe. But until then, be careful who's around when you talk of this. Okay? All right.
Where is the doctor? Where?
There.
Don't move!
What's the meaning of this? Who sent you?
Be quiet!
I'm the head physician.
You will not speak any of this. You understand?
I cannot leave here. I'm the head physician. What have I done? What are the charges? Stop! You have no right!
Let's go!
I am needed here!
Oh! Get in there! Get in there! Good.
The young doctor is Freydun Atouraya, a medical physician, poet, playwright, musician, thinker, and idealist. Freydun's greatest contribution is perhaps his least recognized. He was a revolutionary who spent his entire life trying to reclaim lands lost through the centuries because he wanted to create a democratic Assyrian Christian nation. He became known as Freydun Atouraya, or Freydun the Assyrian, the greatest honor his people could bestow upon him. Assyrians, oldest of the Christian sects, who, to this day, speak in Assyrian, which is also called Aramaic, the language of Jesus Christ. They have also been called Chaldean, a dominant civilization for several thousand years. In its heyday, the boundaries of Assyrian Empire covered almost the entirety of the current-day Middle East. Freydun was born in 1892 in what was then known as Persia, in the small village of Trabash near Lake Dumea.
Freydun, come inside and study.
Okay, Dad.
Freydun was raised with an awareness and appreciation of his Christian faith and his Assyrian culture.
Father, is it true that we Assyrians created the postal service, the battering ram, the wheel, And beer.
And that's not all. The library, formulas in mathematics, science. At the height of the power and glory of Assyria, we had the best doctors, astronomers, builders, artists.
And what happened?
Well, like everything that comes to an end, so did our power and good fortune. We fought amongst ourselves, and it weakened us. So invaders like the Medes, Mongols, and their descendants, the Kurds and the Ottomans, swept in and quickly took over. While most Assyrians embraced the invaders' religion, some of us remained true to our faith. But that meant we could only live as second-class citizens under these new rulers.
So how many of us remain?
Not many. This map is in English. Where did you get it?
At school. The missionaries gave it to me because they had several.
Oh. This is our village, Charbash. One of more than 130 near Lake Ormia and Salamas. Now run your finger along the Tigris Valley to Mosul, where a second group resides. Finally, go up into the Ottoman Empire, where resides a third group who call themselves the Highlanders.
Isn't that where Mar Shamoun lives?
Yes. Mar Shamoun is the secular and spiritual leader of Assyrian Christians. I hear he is quite sick. Everyone says Benjamin, who is next in line, though only 16 years of age, is already quite the leader.
Did the new rulers not appreciate and gain from our own knowledge? I mean, you always said to me that learning opens the mind.
It does. But sometimes the division between cultures runs deeper than even an education can overcome.
Time to eat.
Go wash up, Freydun. It's time to eat.
Okay.
You too, love.
He has a natural curiosity for knowledge, like a true Assyrian.
He has no future if we stay here.
So if we decided to make a nation for ourselves, it would be in the triangle connecting to the three groups. The birthplace of the Assyrian Empire.
Yes.
Now, has anyone tried?
Not that I know of.
Maybe I will.
Maybe you will. Maybe you can build a country after dinner.
I didn't want to say anything in front of him, but you're right. For him to have a good education and for us to live a better, safer life, we must leave Charbash.
Why are we leaving? All my friends live here.
We just want you to have better opportunities, honey.
I mean, I just don't understand.
We're not treated equally here, son. The only way I can get more and better work and pay less tax is not to be a Christian anymore. You see, my faith is in Jesus Christ, and it won't allow me to do that.
It's just not safe for us here anymore. And there's a growing danger.
Danger?
Remember when I was teaching you about the rise of the Ottoman Empire? Well, just like our forefathers were, the Ottomans are now in power. They're just smaller and weaker than we were. Now the Ottoman Sultan wants to expand his power, so he's declared holy war on us, which means the Kurds and Turks can kill us without consequence and claim our lands.
Like what happened at DR back here?
You told him about the massacre.
He should know if it can happen once, it will happen again. Especially if the rest of the Christian world decides to look the other way as these atrocities continue. We don't have strength in numbers here, son, but we're willing to bleed.
Russia?
Yeah.
Freydun's father did well as a contractor, enabling Freydun to attend the best schools in Tbilisi. Beginning in 1905, a wave of political and social unrest spread across the Russian Empire. Which forced Tsar Nicholas to establish a limited constitutional monarchy. Freydun penned his first poems and articles, many of which reflected the atrocities of the Ottoman Empire under Sultan Abdul Hamid, whose reign was called the Years of Zulm, or horror. In 1909, the Young Turks dethroned the Red Sultan, so called because of his bloody reign. The Young Turks were welcomed because they assumed power with a slogan from the French Revolution: liberty, equality, fraternity. But shortly afterwards, it became clear the Young Turks were ardent nationalists as well, and they continued the oppression of murder of all Christians.
O eagle of Kume, ruler of the sky, spread out your wings, to Tiari fly, from Urmi to Mosul, and both of Barwari. Let's honor Assyria, our ancient nation. Then land in Mosul, offer our prayer for our people and their salvation. O mighty traveler, come fly away. Glide forth, don't waver nor delay. Let's honor our martyrs who sacrificed their lives on Ashur's altar. Respect their ways and deeds. Swear allegiance to their creed. When we reach our final destination, O eagle of Assyria and the greater Tsar, drop me on the cliffs, merciless rocks. To Atur, my nation, sacrifice my life. On shores of Zab, old as Ashur, let me fall. Bury me as one who sacrificed all.
Graduating with honors, he enrolled into medical school in Kharkiv, a premier university at the time.
In school, he studied Latin, ancient Greek, German, and French, which exposed him to cultural and political diversity. It helped hone his literary skills and shape his revolutionary thinking.
ملکه
In the summer of 1914, Serbia and Austria-Hungary declared war. It destroyed the complex web of intricate and fragile alliances between the European nations, which in turn ignited the worst war in human history, World War I.
Austrian Archduke Franz Ferdinand was shot down by a Serbian patriot, and the greatest war the world had known exploded in Europe.
In 1915, he graduated medical school and earned an appointment as a doctor in the Russian army.
As a volunteer, he was sent to the 402nd War Hospital in northwestern Iran, in the city of Khoy. The suffering he saw as a battlefield doctor moved him as much as it angered him. Not satisfied just saving lives, he became a crusader for the Christian cause, using his position and contacts with Russian diplomats, bureaucrats, and politicians in Urmia, Khoy, Salmas, and Tabriz in Iran.
The bloodiest days of the conflict had just begun. Working along the outposts exposed him to the human catastrophe firsthand. The Ottomans, under the command of General Rashid Bey, and war-hungry tribes of Turks and Kurds unleashed terror upon the Christian settlements. Freydun heard about bodies flowing downriver past Mosul. The horror reached such a magnitude, this period of the war against Assyrians was known as the Year of Sepho, which translated into the Year of the Sword. Freydun received a promotion to Chief Medical Officer for the North-South Caucasian Railways. It allowed him access to valuable information from soldiers passing through. He befriended two Assyrian stalwarts, Benjamin Arsanis, a teacher who was well placed in the Russian consul, and writer Shlimon de Samos. They became the heart of the first united Assyrian political movement.
Benjamin. Shlimon. The Russians have retaken the villages in Urmia.
That is good news. But you do not look relieved, Freydun.
I am wary.
For what reason?
This conflict is stretching the Russian forces. I've been serving along the outposts, so I know firsthand that they began to rebuild a woefully inadequate military at the outbreak of this war. But I don't think they can sustain war on so many fronts. Who's to know they won't abandon us again? They are going to act in a manner that best suits their strategic interests.
But what can we do but rely on their word? We're not a people of war.
And as such, we're being exterminated.
What do you suggest?
I suggest we create a political party. Call it the Assyrian Unity. A platform, as the name implies, from which we can voice our claims as one people.
That is an excellent suggestion. Let us do it.
But what other news of the war?
Nothing good. As you know, the Assyrian tribal chiefs took up arms against the Turks at the request of the Russians. A mere few thousand held off 10,000 bloodthirsty Turks and Kurds. But then the Ottomans brought in reinforcements of heavy artillery. The Russians promised to help, but they couldn't get there on time. Our boys perished. Not only to the last man, but women and children as well. It only gets more grim. There are Christian casualties everywhere. From the Tigris Valley, I received this letter from a church. Many of the women of Mansuria threw themselves into the river to avoid falling into the hands of the Kurds. But it's not just the wartime atrocities. There's the scourge of a deadly disease. Typhoid is taking the lives of Christians who have not been put to the sword. I've heard now it is an epidemic as widespread as the war.
And our immediate concern must be to deliver donations from our Assyrian brethren in Britain and America to relief workers.
I will accompany the request for funds with some of these heartbreaking letters.
Benjamin, you serve in a high post in the Russian council. Now, what have you heard? Can they protect us?
I've been trying to ascertain, but I'm beginning to believe, like Freydun, that as Christians, we may be on our own.
The villages that deliberately gave up arms were handed down the same cruel fate as resistors. I've heard that young Turks of the Ottoman Empire have been issued a mandate to exterminate every Christian.
So, we need a manner in which we can keep our community informed.
Benjamin, you are the author of the first and only Russian-Assyrian dictionary. Schliemann, there's no other writer more accomplished than you. I just dabble with my pen.
Oh, don't be modest, Freydun. Your poems, they're an inspiration.
Why don't we publish a newspaper for and about our people?
May I suggest a name? Nakusha.
Nakusha it is. We must be truthful, express our deepest concerns so that the people are neither misled by false hope nor seized by untrue fear. And there is one more thing. As we must be loyal to Tsar Nicholas, we must begin to expand our alliances to include the nations who make up the great powers.
But what is it that we have to offer?
The only thing that binds us together as allies. Our faith, our Christianity.
Much of the civilized world was so focused on the widening war, the horrific crimes against Christians were largely ignored. It deeply affected Freydun, fueling him to begin laying the groundwork for an ideology that could unite Assyrians from fighting for just their survival and start fighting for something bigger, self-government and independence.
Most dreams remain unfulfilled because of the enormity of what must be accomplished. So the dream of building a nation will require winning the hearts and minds of Christians. They will be called upon to shoulder burdens of responsibility. To do that with fervor, they must believe. They must believe. I have to find a way to translate idealism into a message that is universal and a goal that is attainable.
Ideally, the nation he wanted to carve out would encompass the biblical boundaries of Assyria, but he was aware of the political, economic, and military realities. He sketched the triangle of Christian settlements his father identified as the dream for a new Assyrian nation.
Every lasting democracy is rooted in free words, not violence. We must strive for the same.
So if we decided to make a nation for ourselves, it would be in the triangle connecting to the three groups, the birthplace of the Assyrian Empire.
Yes.
Now, has anyone tried?
Not that I know of.
Maybe I will.
Maybe you will.
I never forgot the promise I made to myself.
He also knew that to even begin such a conversation, he had to convince Christians they must help the cause of the great powers, Russia, Britain, and France, on the battlefield. They needed to become soldiers. He negotiated the training of 250 volunteers, a number that grew to 2,000. They became the core of a Christian fighting force who were called upon to fight key battles. Also, survivors of fighting age helped strengthen the numbers, many of who volunteered to serve under one of the great Assyrian generals of the time, General Agapetros, a man as brilliant and brave as he was charismatic.
Captain Gracie.
Freydun. General Agapetros, a pleasure to see you both again. General Agapetros, I carry accolades from Great Britain for your valiant actions at Solduz. 1,500 horsemen overcoming 8,000 Ottomans.
Any accolades should be directed to the bravery of men who laid down their lives.
Spoken like the legendary military that you are, sir.
Empty platitudes aside.
Captain Gracie, you're in the British intelligence services. The General and I want to be assured you have the authority of the Crown to negotiate Christian concerns.
Our horses could use some water. Your forces, along with those of Malik Koshoba, Melik Ishmael, and David, Patriarch Mar Benjamin Shimun's brother, have scored some remarkable victories.
We're fighting more with inspiration than ammunition.
I carry good news on that front. The French have offered 20,000 rifles. His Majesty and Russia will pledge whatever we can spare.
Urgency is paramount. Our victims as of today reach around 100,000.
His Majesty is fully aware of the unprovoked massacres of Christians undertaken by the Turks and Kurds under the auspices of the Ottomans.
History restated does not revise it, Captain Gracie. So let us not waste time on what we cannot change.
If we are to be your allies, what is it that you expect of us? Keeping in mind my army consists of able-bodied, barely old enough to fight.
What they lack in experience, they more than make up in passion. The Germans want nothing more than to establish the Baghdad-Berlin Railway so they may seize and plunder oil from your lands.
Let us not be coy, as does Britain and France.
But the Kaiser is no friend of the Assyrians. His allegiance is bound by treaty to the Ottomans. The executions of all the men in the village of Tel Mozilt, the slaying of the children atop Mount Razul Hajar, the slaughter of Assyrian women and children...
Captain Gracie, there's no reason to reiterate what we know.
I repeat my question to you. What do you want of us?
The British forces are engaged against the Germans on several fronts. Our objective is to protect the Arabian Peninsula and Persia. I know you are committed to holding the Russian line, but we could use your help holding the British Ottoman line.
And Russia and Britain will not honor their pledge to protect us without weakening and diverting their forces currently fighting the Germans.
We've been at the wrong end of that choice far too many times.
Such as war. Decisions must be made in the national self-interest.
These attacks on Christian villages are part of a larger Ottoman strategy to expand their empire as far south and east as they can.
So, can I take a message of cooperation back to England?
What if I request for a promise from the great powers that they will help us create an independent Assyria?
His Majesty pledges his assurance.
That does not sound like a promise.
With the outcome of the war in doubt, His Majesty cannot give you one that he cannot keep. You must remember Britain is fighting this war with two allies, France and Russia. While we can insist that it is up to you to solicit their support, Great Britain will be your ambassador at the table if and when we prevail.
War, I understand. The last man standing is the victor. But politics is a game of shadows played by intellectuals with pen and paper, with a great deal of room for interpretation.
Spoken like a man in uniform.
There's not much room for differences of opinion at the end of a barrel of a gun.
Do we have a gentleman's agreement?
The Assyrian soldiers attacked like tigers, General Agapetros wrote, assailing one bulwark of the enemy after another in succession. The patriotism and fearlessness displayed by the young general and his army of overachievers resulted in several important victories. But the war raged on with no end in sight because of advances in military artillery created entrenched, hard-to-defeat front lines. With the European powers pitting most of their forces against each other, the Ottomans seized the advantage. They relentlessly continued their holy war. Within the Assyrian community during this time, the idea of nationalism was usurped by overzealous conservatives, which evoked a rivalry between Freydun and short-sighted, feudal-minded tribal chiefs. Freydun's thoughtful personality was mistaken as aloof and esoteric, deepening and widening the wedge when it was critical to stand united. 1916 arrived with the war showing no signs of abating. There is absolutely no human power to protect these unhappy people from the savage onslaught, was one of the many reports on the worsening plight of Assyrians. As a wealthy industrial power, Britain had more military resources than the Ottomans, who began to hemorrhage from internal dissent and riots. In October, the great powers of Britain, France, and Russia met secretly to sign the Sykes-Picot Agreement. It laid out how they were going to divide and rule the region after the demise of the Ottoman Empire. While there was a provisional plan for the creation of Arab states, there was none for Christians. The following year, Freydun watched another empire fall. This one is a friend and a protector.
At home, starvation and poverty exceeding even previous Russian experiences. Finally, in March 1917, a demonstration in St. Petersburg starts over a simple demand for a higher bread ration, gets out of hand, includes a new demand, transfer of power from the Tsar to an elected parliament. The Tsar reacts in customary fashion, turns his troops loose on the demonstrators, but something goes wrong. The army joins the people. With incredible swiftness, the Tsar's regime falls. A.N. Kerensky, a young lawyer, is made Minister of Justice in a provisional government in which many parties are represented.
I hear it is just a matter of months before Vladimir Lenin and his Bolsheviks overthrow the provisional government in Petrograd. He's promised Russia's withdrawal from this war. The Ottomans have all but conceded. America's entry into this war now seems inevitable, which marks the beginning of the end for Germany. It may take some time, but victory for the great powers is just a matter of time. Lenin knows they will deploy all resources to contain Russia's troubles within Russia's borders. So he will turn his attention to quell the riots and uprisings and assert his control within this new nation he's building.
I have heard the name being contemplated, the United Soviet Socialist Republic. USSR.
It's remarkable what Lenin was able to accomplish. In mere months, he engineered the abdication of the Tsar Nicholas and the collapse of the provisional government in Petrograd.
The provisional government never had a sense of permanency. It was a fractured compromise from the start between striking workers and the leftover aristocracy after the Tsar Nicholas fled.
That does change everything for us. Tsar Nicholas felt duty-bound by the proclamation of himself as a leader to protect Christians. Lenin's philosophy is quite the contrary. It is derived from a political thinker, Karl Marx. Have you read his Communist Manifesto?
Marx suggested the proletariat must revolt in order to oppose oppression and to assume the mantle of governors.
A classless society. Quite idealistic. Marx is someone we can emulate without the atheism.
Where does Lenin's ascension leave our struggle?
Quite well positioned, I should imagine, if we synchronize our efforts with that of Lenin's new USSR. A start might be to rename ourselves as the Assyrian Socialist Party. It may serve as assurance that our objective to create self-government for the Christians is almost identical to what Lenin desires for workers.
Yes, but it will take quite a feat of diplomacy to carve out a nation which encroaches into protectorates of Russia, of Britain, of Persia, and any new countries that emerge after the fall of the Ottoman Empire.
The Turks and Kurds have the numbers to make the case for independence. Maybe we should follow Trotsky's example and create a manifesto for an independent Assyria. It will serve three causes. 1, to articulate our intentions to ourselves. 2, to be the foundation for a constitution for a free democratic nation that 3 Christians can rally behind and support.
A splendid idea.
First, we must determine our borders.
We must begin with philosophy.
How can we have one if we don't know what nature of diversity will exist within these borders?
Our citizens will be Christian.
Are we going to expel those who are not?
An infant, homogeneous nation is far easier to govern.
No, no. Then we're succumbing to the same prejudices we're fighting. Ours will be a Christian nation with Christian values of tolerance for all people.
And with that noble ideal, we can put pen to paper for our manifesto.
The goal of the Free Assyrian Unity is to establish in the future national self-governing in the regions of Urmia, Mosul, Turabidin, Nesabin, Jazira, and Julamerk. An Assyria of religious freedom where there's no difference between rich and poor and man and woman. A military and economical alliance with Russia is paramount.
We must separate church from state.
A taxation that is fair, and education for every child.
We must encourage a free press to hold government honest and accountable to the people.
Let us also agree to appoint ambassadors to encourage investment from and citizenship of Assyrians all over the world. The Urmia Manifesto for the United and Free Assyria. This shall be our guide moving forward hereforth.
Lenin's Bolsheviki seized the railroad stations, telegraph lines, electric plants, and government offices, and declare themselves in business.
To all these, the child star pupil, Comrade Lenin, father of the Bolshevik Revolution, added.
Promises are like firecrackers, made to be broken. It would be mad and criminal to tie one's hands by entering into an agreement of permanence with anybody.
Lenin's declaration cannot discourage us. Rather, it compels us to make a case that will be strong enough to win his approval. So, we must leave no stone unturned to assure the Kremlin that we will be peaceful neighbors and staunch allies. Our faith will complement, not contradict, the government's atheism, and we will be a socialist society based upon Christian values.
Freydun published more than 300 poems, songs, plays, and newspaper articles, which were as much about private reflection as a public appeal of his vision and ideals. While united by their common faith, the Assyrians were divided by geography and the way forward. But they all swore allegiance to their spiritual patriarch, Mar Benjamin Shimon. Freydun deeply respected Mar Benjamin Shimon. Realizing the patriarch's opposition could strengthen the hand of his rivals, Freydun explained that a free Assyria would prevent exactly what the clergy feared: widespread religious disintegration triggered by the rise of the Bolsheviks, as well as the Turks and the Kurds seeking their own pieces of the kingdom as the end of World War I slowly but surely drew closer.
The Army Medical Service had performed with unexcelled valor and vigor. Among the veterans returning from war were thousands who owed their lives to the efforts of the men and women who proudly wore the medical insignia.
Now the world was truly ready for peace. The hope for peace, however, was soon to be doomed by events taking place in other parts of the world.
Suspecting a conspiracy of foreign missionaries who did not have the best interests of the Christian minority, Freydun accused them of spreading fear, writing, "You have sowed only hatred and discord in the hearts of the people." As Freydun suspected and feared, Russia withdrew from the war in 1918. When Lenin publicized the details of the secret Sykes-Picot agreement, Freydun was angry, but did not dwell on the British betrayal. On March 1918, the quest suffered a seismic setback. Mar Benjamin Shimon, the patriarch and spiritual leader, could not stand by and watch the mounting death toll to civilians. His Christian soldiers were ill-equipped and outnumbered. They were losing more battles than they were winning. He arranged a meeting with Simko Shikak, a notorious Kurd chieftain responsible for much of the massacre. Simko agreed to a truce, but on the way out, the patriarch Benjamin and his men were ambushed and slaughtered by the Kurds. The Assyrian National Council gathered in Tbilisi. Without the uniting force of their patriarch and spiritual leader, old rifts and divisions widened. They could not understand how Freydun could be a devout Christian, yet present a manifesto inspired by Marxism. Freydun was openly criticized for being pro-British and pro-French. Rivals engineered his arrest quite a few times. He refused to be intimidated or deterred.
Despite his political differences with others, Freydun did not care when it came to helping the Assyrian people and refugees.
Following the armistice of 1918, Freydun received word of the Paris Peace Conference of 1919. His relentless effort during the war was instrumental in making the great powers aware of the terrible plight of the Christians. Assyrian delegates from the United States, Persia, and Iraq were scheduled to participate. A natural leader, Freydun was assertive but also quick-tempered, so he chose to play a role in the background, working with the Assyrian delegates from Persia and Iraq. But the British did not let them participate, fearing they would disrupt the conference with their demands. So the U.S. delegation presented the idea of an independent Assyrian nation under the protection of the great powers. The Assyrians were urged by official representatives of Great Britain, France, and Russia to enter into the war on the side of the Allies, the petition read, with the most solemn promises of being given a free state. The great powers sidestepped the decision, instead agreeing to create new borders for the Turks and Kurds. Clearly, the British, Americans, and French wanted to maintain control of the oil-rich fields of the Middle East, and the best way was to cater to the resident ethnic majorities. A year later, Freydun and the Assyrians were denied a seat at the table for the Treaty of Sèvres because they were a minority in the regions being discussed. The British assured the Assyrians there would be a protective clause, but it also dealt them a serious setback. Mosul and the Nineveh Plains, which were central to Freydun's Assyria, were given to Iraq. Once again, the British and American designs on oil and money excluded Christians. This betrayal, yet again, by the great powers weakened Freydun's credibility. Also, the Turks and Kurds did not honor their promise and continued their persecution. Many Assyrians left.
O mighty divine, hear my voice whine. Engulfed with sorrows, thou I shall seek. To understand my misery, see my sons, covered in death, have lost their need. Forgot who created their seed on the day of darkness, on the day of being thrown away, covered with hunger and cold above all. Like Adam and Eve, naked as they were, young and old, neither alive nor dead.
Using his stature with the leadership in 1921, Freydun arranged a meeting with the Russian Foreign Minister Chicherin. Freydun hoped to convince Chicherin to allow Christians to return to Urmia and Salamis and reestablish Assyrian populations there. The meeting with Chicherin, if anything, raised Soviet anxiety that Freydun's growing influence and commitment to a free country could incite other ethnic independence efforts. Soon afterwards, the great powers, Russia and Turkey, signed the Treaty of Lausanne. Freydun and the Assyrians, again, were not allowed to participate, but General Agapetros did. It did little to alter the outcome as the lucrative oil interests once again prevailed. Freydun and the Assyrians could only eke out an assurance of safety, but no territory. Freydun's brave articles continued to demand an independent and separate Assyria. They were elevating him into a hero, but he was also making enemies in the highest levels of power. During this complicated time, Freydun met and married Sonia. His son was born a year later. As many times as Britain had betrayed the Christian cause, Freydun and the Assyrians were asked to commit 2,000 soldiers along the Iraq border. They stopped the Turks from annexing Mosul and the Nineveh plains. And yet again, the Assyrians and he were turned away without a formal agreement. By refusing to stop trying, Freydun was seen as a thorn to Russia, Britain, Turkey, Iraq, and Iran, nations that needed to concede land to satisfy his call for a Christian nation. This became a real threat when the League of Nations created the Frontiers Commission in 1924 to look into the border issue. On June 5th, 1926, Britain and Turkey signed a treaty which formally denied Assyrians autonomy. Rather than being disheartened at the seeming end to his crusade, Freydun's calls grew louder through his writings. Also, the British could not be anything less than troubled that the Assyria he was demanding would threaten their oil revenue. Furthermore, extreme Christian factions were afraid he would expose their selfish and short-sighted negotiations with the Kurds and the Turks. They had never stopped calling him a British spy. So it became the perfect accusation, one that the Russians could use, the British would not deny, and his enemies could press. It was probably this growing conspiracy of nations that created the circumstances that led to his arrest on that July morning in Tbilisi.
Don't move! Ah! What's the meaning of this? Who sent you?
Be quiet!
I'm the head physician!
You will not speak any of this, do you understand?
I cannot leave here! I'm the head physician! What have I done? What are the charges? Stop! You have no right! Stop! I am needed here! Sonia, I told you not to come here. I've been arrested before. They're going to let me out soon.
Freydun, it is different this time, isn't it?
Send this letter to the Assyrian National Council in Georgia. The address is in my desk. It proclaims my innocence.
They are accusing you of being a spy?
No. No. It's just convenient. For Russia, for Britain, for the men in my own party.
Freydun, you don't sound hopeful. I have news that will cheer you up and will give you a reason to fight for your freedom. I am pregnant.
Oh, Sonia. That news I will recall when I need a reason to smile. I'm sorry.
You have no reason to be. I knew the man that I was marrying was a freedom fighter. I knew that I had to share with the cause greater than our love. What greater Christian deed is there than to selflessly save fellow Assyrians?
I love you. I love you. Go. Be safe. I will always love you.
I will see you again. I know it in my heart that I will.
Remember me, not for what I failed to achieve, but for what I tried to accomplish.
Soon afterwards, the Soviet government announced that Freydun hanged himself. Nobody believed it then, and with the benefit of the hindsight of history, nobody believes it now. It is inconceivable that a crusader whose life's mission was such a great and noble cause would take his own life, especially since he lived, witnessed, and survived the Assyrian Christian Holocaust. The defiant tone of his last letter indicated he was not a man defeated. Rather, he was determined to prove his innocence. Today, history regards Freydun as a pioneer and visionary who clearly was a visionary before his time, attempting to build a democracy against all odds during the most tumultuous of times, and in a region still grappling with centuries-old ideological hostilities. A self-described revolutionary romantic, if he had been able to unite the realms he sought, the Assyria of his dreams would have been one of the richest nations, a democratic, peaceful, Christian nation, controlling almost a third of the world's oil supply. The bloody history of the region may have never come to pass.
In 1956, after receiving signed petitions from citizens all around the Soviet Union that Freydun was innocent, Soviet Premier Nikita Khrushchev vindicated Freydun's name.